from Urchfab. Today I'm going to be doing a little welding tips and tricks video on box section corners, some different ways to weld them, some tips on the actual welding, tips on how to sort of finish them and make them look seamless. Got a rounded corner, 45 degree, standard sort of 90 degree mitered cut corner, and then also just a different technique of doing a 90 degree, different way of welding, all done with just basic tools. You can do all these with just an angle grinder and a welder and some basic hand tools. Alright, I'm going to start off with the most common, which is just like a miter joint, which is 45 degree cut on both pieces, which is going to give you a 90 degree. You can just set your chop saw to 45 degrees and away you go. If you don't have a chop saw, it's not a problem. Very basic hand tools, you can get really accurate 45 degree cuts. So I like to use a scribe rather than a pen if you're trying to get accuracy with something, because it just gives you a much better line to work with. So what you want to do when you mark your line coming back across here is sort of eyeball down through it and mark up exactly where this line ends. So you've got to try and sort of scribe around the corner a little bit to get your mark. When it comes to cutting, like, you want to keep the angle grinder 90 degrees to what you're cutting. When you cut through that end piece, you don't want to flip it over and then cut 90 degrees to that, because then you're going to have a funny sort of angle to deal with at this end. You want to keep the disc cutting at the same angle all the way across, as if it was a you know, the way that a chop saw would cut it. It would continue to cut that at this angle. Protect your eyes, protect your ears, protect your lungs. If you're new to using an angle grinder, don't ever use one without a guard on it. So by keeping the disc at 45 degree, I've got a nice angle there that will butt up to the next piece, which I'm just going to do on the chop saw. Okay, if you've got a chop saw, it's going to make life a lot easier, much quicker. I'm just going to show you how I prep these now for welding. Alright, so what I've done with this is this edge here, I've ground flat, so 90 degrees to this plane, just flattened it off. And then these two side edges, I've put a 45 degree bevel on. When you match that up with the other one, you've got a 90 degree like valley to fill there, and you've got a 90 degree little valley to fill on the end. Reason for that is, if you don't bevel this and you want to grind it all off and make it look seamless, if you just weld along the top, weld that edge where they meet, you're then going to grind it all off and round it all off and take away all of your weld you've put onto it, and it's going to be a very weak joint. If you're going to fettle something off, you want to know that the weld is really sat down below the surface of the material. Another benefit is, by doing this, you'll end up with much less weld built up on top to grind off anyway. So it's a better joint, a little bit of preparation beforehand, you're just going to get a better result at the end of it. So when it comes to welding, if this was a flat table, you're making something that needs to stay flat, if you lay this all out and you haven't got some kind of like fixturing table, so you lay it out on the table and then you just weld across here, so this has got four corners on it, that weld's going to shrink and it's going to pull it up like that, and your whole thing is going to go out of square. So you need to think about where you can weld it, where it's least likely to be able to cause you a problem. So if the priority is to keep this flat that way, you don't want to be doing your first welds on the top. You want to be doing them inside and outside. That way it's never going to kink it up. And I'll weld my insides and my outsides first. Once they're welded, it's braced everything that way. When you come to weld the tops, it's not going to be able to kick it up and, you know, ruin your flatness of whatever it is you're trying to make. There's our welded joint. You can see the weld sunk into that valley quite nicely, and we've already got quite like a nice rounded over corner. So now we'll move on to grinding it and getting it to look like there's no seam there. When you come to grind it, what you want to do is you want to grind across the face of the weld. You don't want to try and grind along the face of the weld. If you're grinding across the face of it, you're going to see the point when you start to take material off of the bits of tube, and that's where you know you're completely flat. If you start going in like this, you're going to end up digging into here, and same when you come to grind this bevel over this corner. What I do is I'll work with each face at a time. So I'll go from this side, I'll keep the grinder flat to this face and work it until I grind the edge of this down till it meets this face. Work it that way, then I'll go from this face, keep it flat this way, and you'll end up with a pointed edge. Go from this face, and then all your corners will meet. When you've got to that point where it's flat on every face, then the last thing you do is just round the edge over. And that way you can get a really good finish. Now I've got the faces all flatted off. Then I'm going to follow these curves on the outside and sort of mirror those all the way to the end. And then you'll get a look that looks pretty seamless. When it comes to this inside weld, you got a couple of options. Die grinder works well. You can get in there and that's going to leave you, a nice curve. If you don't have one of those, a flat wheel that's got a nice curve worn into it will get in there as well. Then if you're really looking to get it sort of perfect, if it's a piece of furniture or just something you want really good, you can finish it off with a file that will highlight any sort of like high spots, low spots. Another thing I forgot to mention, you've got a seam on your box section, so if you're really wanting to make something that's visually got to be kind of perfect, I always will put that out of sight, whether it's underneath or inside. So for this one, we're going to do a 90 like that, with a 45-degree infill on the corner, so you don't have a sharp 90-degree pointed edge. So probably the easiest way to do this one is just to set your box section up corner to corner and then take a measurement corner to corner, which is 70 mil. Then what I'm going to do is cut a 45-degree on the chop saw, or if you don't have a chop saw, do it the same as we did, as I showed you first. So just mark that 70 mil. So now I'm going to do the same thing, bevel all these weld edges to try and get a little valley to actually fill with weld. So again, I just use the corners and the flats that you've already got to work with as a guide for the grinder, and sort of keep them on those planes, and you can get, you know, you can match everything up pretty good and get something that looks neat. So for this one, we want to create a rounded off corner. Just take a measurement from the inside edge to the outside edge of the box section. So inside of this wall, reason being, I'm going to use this outside edge to fold it around the curve that we cut. You'll see what I mean in a minute. But inside edge to outside edge is 48 mil. So I've got a piece of card, which is a right angle. Set my vernier to 48 mil. And just stick it on the corner. Mark a little line on that. But before we mark it, we need to know how much of this piece is going to take to fold it around there. Need to measure basically that. So just use a tape measure. Tape measure never works very well trying to measure rounds like that, but it will, if you put it backwards, obviously that's the way it rolls up inside the tape, so you can get a pretty accurate measurement doing it that way. So that is 78 mil. So I'll mark this at 80. Just want to be left with that this top strip, and that line forward, and that line there. There's one more way of doing a 90, which is, it's not something I ever do, to be honest, but it is another way you can do it. I'm not going to grind that one off just because it's going to look exactly the same as the mitre joint. But yeah, I don't really use this very often. Well, never really. Because if you've got a chop saw, 45 degree is going to be quicker. If you've only got a grinder, this may actually be a quicker way of doing it. 4 different ways of doing pretty much the same thing. Some take longer than others. This is what I use almost all the time doing any kind of box section work. Just the 45-degree miter, really quick, but you've got some options there. Do whatever works best for you or whatever fits the application you're doing. If you like the fabrication tips videos, I'll put a link to another one up here somewhere. That's going to be it for this one. Just watching. See you on the next one.